Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Now I've got it. I finally understand what the difference between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan despot, is. You know what the difference is?
What?
Her skincare routine. Thank you, Instagram. People want me to post my skincare routine, she wrote in Instagram. I don't want to seem too product placement-y.
I've been waiting. Is that
Too
even
product
a word?
placement-y. It's like tippy-top.
Tippy-tappy-tap-tap.
So I'm not going to go crazy with brands, but here's the gist. And she recommends a double cleansing. First using a balm or oil to melt off the makeup, then using a soapy cleanser to wash your skin.
And then you get the Ocasio-Cortez glow?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm
Thank you. This beauty tip brought to you by Dan Proft.
I'm going to try it.
You know what?
Yeah.
Let's do it tomorrow because everyone's going to be off and not a lot of people will be in their cars,
Yeah.
You can just do an on-air facial.
Thank you, Ocasio-Cortez. Interesting, the reaction to the prospect of deposing a dictator who, along with his predecessor Chavez, has destroyed a nation and plunged tens of millions of people into life-threatening poverty.
Yeah.
The reaction from some of the leading lights of the left, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, a U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela is not a solution to the dire issues they face. Is a coup, is that what's going on in support of Guaido, or is it a revolt against the Marxist dictator? Tulsi Gabbard, in case you thought she was a moderate because she served in the military. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela, let the Venezuelan people determine their future. Well, that's sort of what's happening with some encouragement by the United States in the form of recognizing Guaido, in the form of offering humanitarian aid, in the form of trying to free the Venezuelan people from the despotism under which they've suffered.
Well, John Bolton yesterday said that all options are on the table. He had a real quick press briefing. But I scribbled on his yellow pad, Dan, it said 5,000 troops to Colombia. So that, everybody was inquiring about that, but he was tight-lipped.
This piece from last month, Christina Solbaran lives in Venezuela. The Maduro diet. Just to put a human face on it, try and give you a sense of it.
What's going on?
I know you've been perhaps watching some of it on TV, but the descent began in the early 2000s when the Hugo Chavez government began to take control of elections, private companies, the judiciary, and the police. The descent turned into a nosedive when Maduro came to power and the state tightened its grip on oil production, our country's main source of revenue. Investors fled, skilled workers emigrated. As living standards plummeted, the response was to print more money. Hyperinflation has been the result. The young are all leaving Venezuela. Some due to the inflation, lack of work, others because of security fears. We don't go out after dark. Those who do take huge risks. A friend's son was kidnapped on his way back from the cinema, the perpetrators demanding an extortionate ransom. Tragically, kidnappings work. I'm 69 and retired now. I feel too old to leave. Compared with others, I count my blessings. However, even basic medicines are increasingly scarce now in Venezuela. I'm lucky to have a son who sends me my thyroid pills from abroad. Every day I go to the supermarket in the hope of finding the supplies I need, but I'm almost always disappointed. On my last visit, I was looking for the basics: vegetable oil, sugar, milk, flour, bread, butter. But there was nothing on the shelves, just a few bags of crisps, some loo paper, and tins of sardines. Most of what I need is on the black market. And she goes on just to recount these stories that I think are being revisited, as well they should be, with the prospect of regime change in Venezuela that is organic. We didn't pick Guaido and put him in Caracas. And so the Democrats' response to me, in the face of what we know is the reality on the ground, is remarkable. For more on this and other topics, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Noah Rothman. He is the associate editor for Commentary Magazine, and he's got a new book out on social justice and the unmaking of America, and we'll get to that. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What about the left's response to the happenings in Venezuela?
Well, I think you've seen actually a pretty reasonable response from Democrats, Senate Democrats, including Dick Durbin and Chuck Schumer And even Bernie Sanders, believe it or not, who still paid obeisance to some of these diktats of the far left, but he wasn't totally opposed to what is a very constitutional process that is happening in Venezuela that has created these two parallel regimes. It is hardly a coup. What you've seen, however, from the far left, the new democratic class, members of the so-called democratic socialists, has been this nostalgic throwback to a time and place in which the Soviet menace was expansive all over the world, and American interventionism and secret plots was sort of the way in which American foreign policy was conducted. It has no bearing on the present status of what's happening in Venezuela, and the moral compromises that these members of the far left have made in order to justify their support for a bloody and incompetent socialist regime have been huge moral compromises and really sapped them of credibility on the issue. They've made some really bad calculations here.
Do you think the U.S. should insert themselves and bring in some military might? I mean, you did see that still shot of Bolton on his notepad saying 5,000 troops to Colombia?
Yeah, I sort of find it hard to believe that the National Security Advisor, one little line scribbled on his outward-facing legal pad, would announce our deployments to a country that is very much not a matter of deployment at this point. It's not a matter of intervention militarily. That said, the fact that we've seen quite a lot of commentators, both in the press and on the Democratic left, saying that this is the phrase "all options are on the table" is prelude to war, is nonsensical. It's the sort of thing that you say as a matter of course. Barack Obama said it just about every time the issue of Iran came up, even though everybody knew that all options were not on the table. To say all options are not on the table is to invite provocation. And one of the reasons why our diplomats are still there is because we are recognizing this alternative government, the legal government of the National Assembly leader, Juan Guaido. And in order for that to be an effective deterrent to any sort of provocation by this military, we have to back that with a threat of force. And that's just competent statecraft. And I think people understand that at an intuitive level, but to admit that would be to give the Trump administration credit for what has been a really competent process. They've handled this in a really very deft fashion, coordinating responses across the Western Hemisphere and putting the military on its back foot and forcing Maduro to compromise and to view his own position as very tenuous. I think they've done a very good job, actually, and they deserve some credit for that. But that's anathema to the Democratic left.
Just sticking with that new Democrat socialist class you were talking about, Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib, she now of the infamy of saying we have to impeach that MFer, right? And now she's a big celebrity, too, because of that grand insight, that courageous statement. She is sort of in a bit of more hot water, maybe, at least in some quarters, because of this fundraiser ally of hers, a Palestinian activist named Maher Abdel Kader, who in a 2018 video described Jews as satanic. He questioned the Holocaust. Research the truth about the Holocaust, and you'll definitely start to question what you thought you knew, the video's narrator says. What about the and we saw this controversy of around this Democrat socialist anti-Semitism around the Women's P-Hat March a couple of weeks ago as well. What about this anti-Semitism of among some of the Democrat socialist stars and its relative tolerance by many on the left, including corporate America?
Well, we've seen an increasing trend among the left in America towards a sort of uniformity with the European left, and it's becoming more and more apparent that anti-Semitism is a very big part of that coalition. The labor movement, the Labor Party movement in the UK has been fending off accusations of anti-Semitism and losing members left and right over one anti-Semitism scandal after another for quite some time, and they're presently led by Jeremy Corbyn, who is a supporter of Hamas and Hezbollah in rhetoric as well as action, and has embraced some of the diktats of an anti-Semitic movement called BDS, Boycott, Sanctions, and Divestment, which seeks to stigmatize any effort to work with social, non-governmental, legal, or political institutions in the world's only Jewish state. That meets the working definition of anti-Semitism as anyone has defined it. But that's also something, the BDS movement is also something to which people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and others in the ascendant wing of the Democratic Party have paid fealty to. They think that it's a reasonable response to Israeli foreign policy. And it's indistinguishable in many ways from rank anti-Semitism. And it necessitates that you form coalitions with some of these people who are, as you say, just this side of supporters of bloody terrorist acts in Israel and around the world targeting Jews. So it's, as you say, it's sort of like a part and parcel of this intellectual evolution of the far left of the Democratic Party, that in order to embrace these ideas of global and international egalitarianism that they supposedly support, that you have to also embrace the murder and the stigmatization of being Jewish.
Well, this is a perfect segue to your book, Unjust, in which you channel Voltaire and his comment on the Holy Roman Empire being neither holy or nor Roman. Social justice, neither social nor just. Explain what you mean.
Well, I suppose for Americans who aren't really deeply involved in this movement, the idea of social justice can just seem like a unobjectionable catch-all for all things good, just sort of an American idea of fairness and equality and even reparative relations for historical wrongs, of which there are many, and they are real and valid. But it has become, in the hands of its activist class, an embittering and retributive philosophy that necessitates racial hierarchies and downward social leveling and a programmatic governmental response to historical conditions that the programmatic governmental response cannot meet, and also creates the idea in these activists that their activism is insufficient, that working within the political system is not going to achieve the processes necessary to affect this kind of historical righting of wrongs, and so they either withdraw from the political system or, worse, embrace extra political activities and become violent. And that is the evolution that I identify in this book. It talks about the silly and the serious aspects of social justice activism, the narcissism that it encourages in its members, and the ways in which it transforms its adherents into something that doesn't resemble an egalitarian American ideal, but something much more European and far more antithetical to the idea of a social compact around which the United States is generally formed. So it's well, I think, a pretty dangerous idea. It's mostly on the left, but it is not exclusive to the left. And while it's a small phenomenon, it's increasing in popularity, and that popularity needs to be arrested immediately. And so I identify some ways in which you can see social justice in the wild, look at it and know what you're looking at, and then hope to stigmatize it and isolate it and stop this progress before it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me one of the things you're getting at in the book is about explaining these contradictions, right? The misnomers. Von Mises, talking about socialists many moons ago, said liberals don't believe in liberty. Now, that seems to be a contradiction in terms, but it needs to be explained so you understand exactly what the underlying substance of the kind of top-line appellation really implicates.
Yeah, Friedrich Hayek actually wrote a very powerful attack on the Rawlsian idea of social justice, which, by the way, even social justice activists have abandoned at this point. They're no longer invested in equality. Equality is actually counterproductive. It would blind its adherents to the historical grievances that are suffered by individuals who have very distinct traits, and to blind oneself to those distinct traits is morally obtuse. What Hayek said about social justice is that it is essentially antithetical to itself. Once you append social basically onto any word, it dilutes the meaning of the word that it is supposedly modifying. But it is the idea that you have to create institutions, Rawlsian idea, that you have to create institutions that will mete out justice in a disparate fashion. And so those institutions, in order to achieve equality, have to treat individuals very differently. And once that institution dedicates itself to that process, it is no longer a just institution. It is creating for itself a radicalizing concept that will necessitate discrimination and downward leveling. So one of the things, affirmative action used to be this idea that you have to build certain segments of the population up because they've been historically wronged. Positive discrimination. And the effect of that was negative discrimination too, but that was sort of voce. It was collateral damage, and it wasn't the desired effect, but it was just something that happened along the way. Now, negative downward social leveling for social justice activists is the point. If there's any positive leveling that attributes to that, well, it's all well and good, but that's not the whole point of this process. The point of this process is to achieve retribution and to put certain classes where they belong. That's a dangerous philosophy. It's an embittering philosophy, and it's one that I think needs to be stopped.
He is Noah Rothman. His thought-provoking new book, you want to pick it up, Unjust, Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. You can also catch his writings always at Commentary Magazine. Noah, thanks for joining us. Good luck with the book.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey, everyone.